After taking over as emperor in 14 AD, after Augustus's death, Tiberius started off well. He was a spendthrift who managed the empire's finances well, resisting wars of expansion in favor of shoring up the borders. However, his son died in mysterious circumstances in 23 AD, which is when Tiberius seems to have snapped. He leaves Rome and lives on Capri at Villa Jovis, or Villa of Jupiter. He basically gives governing authority to Sejanus, the Praetorian prefect, the head of the Praetorian Guard. Initially, the Praetorian Guard was just an elite group of Roman soldiers who acted as royal bodyguards. However, Augustus expanded and elevated the Praetorian Guard into a police force in the city of Rome that acted as an intelligence service alongside its bodyguard duties. So it was like the Roman version of the Stasi or the KGB. After Augustus, the Praetorians realized how much power they actually had. To make a long, bloody story short, Sejanus manipulated Tiberius's paranoia into believing that everyone was plotting against him. So Tiberius allowed Sejanus to try and execute all number of people for treason. But it was mostly just Sejanus killing people who opposed him or whose power he wanted to consolidate. All the while, Tiberius is hanging out at Villa Jovis, where he is committing acts of remarkable sexual depravity. The acts are so immoral and depraved that I will not mention them in this video. Suffice it to say, his depravity, cruelty, and paranoia knew no bounds. So in 31 AD, after years of running the empire for Tiberius, Sejanus' scheming catches up with him. Tiberius gets word that Sejanus is plotting to put even more power for himself. So Tiberius has Sejanus executed by strangulation. After that betrayal, any glimmer of restraint in Tiberius was gone. What follows can only be described as a purge. In his paranoia, Tiberius was trying people for treason for any perceived slight, and executions in Rome were practically a daily basis. It was a reign of terror. So to keep the timeline together in your head, it is these years, the early 30s, that Jesus was crucified. So there were political executions in Rome and political executions in distant eastern provinces. When Tiberius finally died in 37 AD, people were jubilant. However, you know that saying that goes, things have to get better because they can't get any worse. Well, anyone who had said that about Tiberius' successor was very wrong. Most everyone who could have succeeded Tiberius had been killed. So his only option was Gaius, Julius, Caesar, Augustus, Germanicus, known to history as Caligula. And Caligula was insane, like a legitimate psychopath. Caligula was the great-nephew of Tiberius. Basically, Caligula's grandfather was Tiberius's brother. There is a long and twisted tale about Caligula's family and how they suffered at the hands of Tiberius and Sejanus. Caligula's mother believed that Tiberius was responsible for Caligula's father's death, so she and Caligula's two older brothers were banished from Rome. They all died, starving to death in prison or in exile. After Sejanus' execution in 31 AD, Caligula lived with Tiberius at Villa Jovis. So, a young psychopath living at the debauched court of his psychopathic great-uncle who was responsible for destroying Caligula's family. That is a recipe for one messed up dude. Caligula was unhinged. He relaxed and passed the time by watching people get viciously beaten at Villa Jovis. Caligula took men's wives whenever he pleased, then humiliated them in public. If he liked your home or land, he'd just have you arrested and executed, and then take it for himself. And without going into detail, Caligula would instruct the executioner to make the death as slow and painful as possible, and he'd watch, and make the condemned man's families watch. Besides his sadistic cruelty, he was also a horrible administrator. Caligula spent the empire into debt with wanton, outlandish expenditures. He had a malicious sense of humor and a desire to humiliate, especially the senators. Caligula also had grandiose delusions. He talked and dressed and presented himself as if he were a god. He ordered his statue to be placed in every temple in the empire so he could be worshipped as a god. And most complied. But I'll give you one guess as to the people who utterly refused to comply: the Jews. As we talked about in the resurrection episodes, the Jews already hated Rome. Desecrating their temple with an idol was unimaginable. It was actually Herod Agrippa who intervened, preventing riots and uprisings. There are a lot of Herods, and I will work that family into an upcoming episode. Herod Agrippa is the third generation of Herods, the grandson of Herod the Great, who tried to kill baby Jesus from the Christmas story. Well, Herod Agrippa was raised in Rome with Tiberius's children, but supported Caligula in Tiberius's later years, for which Tiberius imprisoned Agrippa. However, Caligula released Agrippa from prison when Tiberius died, and Caligula awarded Agrippa a considerable territory back in Israel to rule. So Herod Agrippa had the clout to talk Caligula out of putting a statue in the temple in Jerusalem. There are many other stories, but just one more ridiculous Caligula tale. Caligula needed a military victory on his resume. After all, he was emperor of Rome and a god nonetheless. So he plans a campaign on Britain. But by the time he's marched to the northern shores of France, still Gaul at this time, and looking across the channel to Britain, his soldiers are in mutiny. So Caligula lines up his soldiers in battle formation on the beach facing the ocean. Caligula then orders his troops to gather all the seashells on the beach as spoils of war they just won against Neptune, the Greek god of the sea. He returns to Rome to celebrate the triumphant victory over the ocean, with the seashells displayed as the treasures of victory. By 41 AD, Caligula had pushed too far. A plan was hatched and Caligula was assassinated. And guess who was behind it? The Praetorian Guard. The assassins also murdered his wife and only daughter, hoping to take out all blood relatives. However, the assassins failed to kill his uncle Claudius, whom a faction of the Praetorian Guard took into their protection. That same evening, the Praetorian Guard proclaimed Claudius the new emperor. They believed they could wield the power of the throne through Claudius as a puppet. However, as we will see in the next time we catch up on Rome, that would not be the case. At his death, Caligula was 28 years old and had ruled Rome for only 4 years. He was cruel, arrogant, corrupt, erratic. Basically, he was insane, and a poor administrator of the empire to boot. And yet, Rome survived his reign of terror just as they had survived Tiberius's. Despite the horrific reigns of Tiberius and Caligula, Rome was still ascending, and Pax Romana was in full swing.